In my younger days, I spent 8-hour stretches in what I called the Iron Fortress. This was a 24/7 kiosk in the park at the heart of the city where my mom had to work. We lived in a dormitory on the outskirts, making a whole day in the big city feel like a grand adventure for me. Soon enough, I became familiar with the area, knowing where aromatic bread lay on cafeteria tables, the right words to get a free pass into a nearly empty theater, and the art of sampling at the grocery market for a decent meal. At night, I'd return to my mom in the fortress. That's when the main trade would commence. The first customer was Nocturnal. This nocturnal shopper stood out with a shark-like nose that grew right at eye level, and ended there too. He always bought Balamer cigarettes and paid with Soviet kopecks. Mom had to cover the difference, but her salary from this place allowed for it, and the price wasn't steep. We'd heard stories from the clerks that Nocturnal, if left unsatisfied, wouldn't leave even after stepping away from the kiosk. He'd lurk, pounce on the departing seller from the shadows, and stare into their face. Rumor had it that Aunt Gallia, who worked there before my mom, ended up disabled after one of these encounters. If Nocturnal caught you once, they said, he'd never let you go and could leap out of a wardrobe or a dark pantry, staring you down. Back then, I treated these tales like bedtime horror stories about the Black Hand, and the rituals seemed no stranger than hopping lines on the pavement. Understanding why adults performed these rituals came much later. So did the realization that Aunt Gallia was likely our neighbor, Granny Galina Petrovna, whom kids wheeled onto the balcony in a wheelchair to survey the surroundings with vacant eyes. Another frequent, though not obligatory, visitor was Lame. Unlike Nocturnal, he wasn't there to buy anything. As soon as the swaying figure appeared in the distance, the lights in the kiosk would go out, and Mom would hide me under the counter. I know Lame knocked loudly on the windows and doors, but I never saw his face. I believe no one who could tell about him ever did. Undoubtedly, there were other peculiar visitors, but in the 2 and a bit months, I never managed to encounter them. Closer to 3 a.m., those who were responsible for the nightly windfall of the store would arrive. In my mind, I called them the people in tall attire. When I say arrive, I might be fibbing, as I never noticed anyone specifically walking toward us. Dark silhouettes simply gathered from all directions. They could be seen wherever streetlights failed to reach, where one could distinguish true darkness from semi-darkness. That's when my help was required. Mom would open the fridge and retrieve various meat byproducts, kidneys, livers, intestines, and even eyes. Our task was to quickly and as far away as possible toss them through a small window. After that, near the edge of light, a commotion would begin, where you could start making out something. Here and there, high collars, pointed headgear, elongated legs, and straight sleeves much longer than their arms. The people in tall attire sorted through the goods, attempting to attach them to their bodies. The item didn't always correspond to its natural function. I noticed that not only eyeballs but also discarded kidneys and even rib bones often found their way into eye sockets, resulting in profiles with tusks. Then, the park would experience a complete power outage, and a knock on the window signaled it was time to open it without peeking. On the tiny table, various trinkets would appear, bottle caps, Soviet 5 kopek coins, and clumps of soil. But each time, there were also antique coins, golden teeth, and wedding rings. One day, Mom took such items to a jewelry store for appraisal, but the kiosk owner found out, leading to a major scandal with threats. That's how every shift went. During the day, I amused myself in the city center, and at night, I played these strange games. One day, the city faced food shortages, and concerned citizens, following tradition, cleared the shelves of all meat, including entrails and beef tails. Apparently, the kiosk owner had special supplies because our fridge never ran out. By that time, we had seemingly saved up enough. Mom could even afford not to take me along for a couple of shifts, leaving me with a hired neighbor. We were planning to move soon. However, the owner of the fortress seemed to have a falling out with the gang, disappeared, and the new owner not only refused to restock meat but also threatened my mom with dire consequences if she tried to cheat him. As the fridge emptied, anxiety grew. Finally, one day, Mom's replacement suggested, through a significant connection, buying a piglet in a joint purchase from some relatives in the village. I can't imagine how much the meat cost then, but in relative prosperity, we had to pawn our room. Yet, it allowed me to secretly taste real pork that the replacement prepared. Since we no longer had a room, for several consecutive days, we lived right in the kiosk, permeated by abnormally cold pre-autumn winds, and I witnessed the day when the supplies ran out. After releasing the snub-nosed one, we hastily awaited the shadows to obstruct the view of distant streetlights in the park. As always, we opened the fridge and started scattering the remains of the piglet. As before, a commotion began outside. But this time, it unexpectedly ceased quite soon. The lights in the park went out, but no one knocked on the window. The people in tall attire surrounded the kiosk, silently awaiting something. Apparently, the piglets inside didn't suit them. A couple of minutes later, they began their silent movement. The ring around the fortress tightened, and if not for the lack of lighting, from this distance, one could have seen their long, stilt-like legs, high collars, and faces that night after night grew with someone's kidneys or intestines. But I didn't get to see it. Mom sat me under the counter, then she armed herself with an iron scoop, kissed me on the forehead, and went out the door. Unable to stay here, I rushed after her, but Mom blocked the only exit from the kiosk from outside. So, I pressed against the window. I saw how dozens of elongated hands reached for her silhouette in a white jacket. But then the formation parted. The white figure disappeared into the shadows of the trees and then dragged something resembling a sack from there. The circle around the fortress turned into a pile. At that moment, the door opened, Mom grabbed me, and we rushed away. We ran to the station and boarded a train that took us to the Far East. No one hindered us. Surprisingly, we had enough money for a decent house in the village and to settle in initially. But to this day, this story haunts me, even though I have never encountered anything as strange in life since then.